So it does look like we've got Bob on the line. So Bob, we can't hear you yet, and we shouldn't be, but I did want you to know we do see you. So we will call on you in a minute when it's time to start.
Well, I got to start this meeting. I'm sorry. Good luck. John, are you going to have to upgrade Blake again?
I don't currently see him as one of the attendees. So he might just be a little slow tonight.
Just talk to Blake. He says he's almost in. I think he's trying to get in through the packet agenda again.
Okay. I'll promote him as soon as we see him.
John, he's there.
Yep.
And can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm in. And how is everybody this fine evening?
We're doing good.
Excellent, excellent.
Doing good, Councilman Severing. Is Bob with us, John?
He is. I have not unmuted him yet, but he is listening and ready when we call on him.
Well, let's go ahead and start our meeting then. I think it's a little bit after 6 o'clock. We have all the council here. Council, thank you so much for spending time tonight serving the citizens. It's good to see your smiling faces. Although I can't see if Councilman Swanson is smiling or not. Somehow he disappeared. But anyway, welcome this evening. Our thought and our pledge of allegiance will be given by Bob Buswell. And we also welcome any of the public that's with us tonight. And hopefully they'll participate with us and give us some input and comments. So with that, let's go ahead and start with Bob, if he's unmuted. He's going to give us a thought, a prayer, or whatever, then we'll go to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Are you there?
Yes, we can hear you, Bob.
Okay, here we go. Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We are thankful that we can meet tonight and now pause and communicate with thee. We are thankful to live in this beautiful city of North Ogden. We are thankful to be citizens of the United States of America. We are thankful for our freedoms, the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of religion. We not only pray for our city's direction, but pray for the leaders of our state and nation. We pray for direction this night as we discuss the different items on our agenda, that we might be open with one another and discuss the items at hand. We now pray for thy Spirit to be with us. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
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 And Bob, we've got the flag up on the screen, and so you can lead us out.
We pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Bob, thank you very much for that prayer and for the Pledge of Allegiance. We appreciate you joining us tonight. And hopefully you can
You're welcome.
Hopefully you can stay and join us for the rest of the meeting.
Okay.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get into our agenda. Our first item is our consent agenda, and that is to look for a approval of the October 27th City Council meeting minutes. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes? If not, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the October 27th City Council meeting minutes. Do we have a motion?
Mayor?
Councilwoman Stoker, is that you?
Yes. Motion to approve the minutes of October 27th.
Thank you for that motion. Do we have a second?
I second that.
I have a second by Council Member Severing. Any further discussion on the minutes? If not, all in favor, say aye.
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 Looks like we have none opposed. Thank you. We'll now move into our active agenda and seek any public comments. John, do we have anyone with us tonight?
We do have several with us. No one has raised their hands as of yet or posted any comments.
Okay, we'll wait just a minute to see if we have any.
We received a type in chat from Susan Clemens that says, "Thank you for the leaf truck."
Thank you, Susan. And I would say I've received a lot of positive comments on the leaf truck. I think our Public Works Department has done an excellent job. I know they've been out on Saturdays, in some cases Sundays, trying to serve the citizens. And so I expressed my thanks to them this morning in our staff meeting, but I appreciate that. I think that's a good service to our citizens. Anything else you're seeing, John?
No, not yet.
Looks like we have two comments in chat.
Yeah, that was the second comment was that Susan Clemens had noticed it was out on Sunday.
Yeah. So I appreciate the sacrifice of our Public Works team and their willingness to spend that time. All right, let's go on to item number 3. We've had a inquiry by JD Dowpaz on some ideas on our garbage rate. And so he's put together a little bit of presentation. So JD, if you're with us, let's go ahead and hear your presentation.
I don't see him here yet, Mayor. Unless he's signed in under a different name. If he'd raise his hand, we can make him, or I can unmute him, but I'm not seeing him right now.
John, maybe somebody, Annette or someone could try to contact him, and we'll go on to item number 4. We're waiting for JD to join us, which would be a discussion on the North Hills development. And our presenter will be Rob Scott. So let's go ahead with item number 4.
Okay, let me promote Rob. I did let the applicant for this one know that they, it wouldn't start right at 6, and so I don't see them either. But Rob is here.
I am here, Mayor and Council and those joining the meeting. You're well aware that this particular project first was known as the North Cove project. They have renamed it the North Hills project, so hopefully that isn't too confusing. And as a part of that, the applicant and his design team, they continue to make modifications and updates to the various exhibits that they've given us. So in your packet, you have the copy of the annexation plat. There's also a map showing the slope analysis. There's also a new file called Design Examples, which gives various design alternatives for different slopes. And it also includes some building elevations that are there for potential consideration. And we also have a new exhibit, which is called Acreage, which identifies the amount of acreage that's on the north of the Utah power line and also on the south of the Utah power line. And along with it, there's a range of potential units that would go in both of those areas. So I'll get to that in just a minute. So in terms of process, as far as this project, there's there are a number of processes that must be approved in order for the development to be able to secure building permits. So first and foremost would be annexation. As part of the annexation process is the attachment of whatever zone the council decides, development agreement, subdivision, and potentially plan unit development approvals, and with an appropriate community outreach. So all of those things require at least public notice. So we have those maps as it relates to those. What we would like to focus on this evening is to identify some policy questions for the council to determine what are the parameters for what you would like to see as far as the overall project. We, in previous meetings, have spent a fair amount of time identifying some of the technical details. We're not going to focus on those unless you have questions about them, but we'll be focusing for the most part on, I've identified a number of policy questions for you. Don't feel bound by those. You might have some of your own that you would like to add as part of the discussion. So in addition to that, I've also identified some things with respect to our general plan, and I've also given you some questions to ponder as part of this discussion tonight as far as a summary of land use considerations. So that's found on page 4. Let's focus on pages 2 and 3. I will, I'm not sure, Mayor, how you want to go, if you want to go through these individually, if you want me to just give a little summary and then throw it back to the council to discuss them.
Let's try the summary with the council discussing. I'm sure they've had a chance to look through the detail. It was very well prepared.
Great.
So let's try the summary.
Sure, thank you very much. So the first question is, the property is within our annexation boundary declaration as found in our general plan. It's still an option for the council to decide on as in every annexation as to whether or not the city desires to annex the property. The second part of any annexation is identifying what zone that property should be zoned, and along with that, what are the standards that would go along with that. So to help you with that, I've given you a little table that identifies the total acreage, both the gross acres and with developed acres. And I don't know that the developed acres, I haven't really talked to their consultant as to whether or not that includes streets or not. That might affect the density as well. But the table that I've given you at least gives you a little bit of a comparison. So the property is zoned currently is the county A1 zoning. That's 1 unit per 40,000 square feet. So a little less than 1 unit per acre, 1.08 units per acre. In other words, 2 units per 2 acres, or a density of a half unit per acre. So that actually should be just a little bit underneath 1 per acre. The HP2 zone, that has a acreage of 12,500 square foot lots. And the gross density for that would be 3.48 units per acre. And that would equate to about 591 dwelling units. The county zoning would be 185. If you take the North Hills proposal, and they have shifted somewhat with respect to these numbers, but it's a range of 3.7 to 4.2 units per acre, depending on the number of dwelling units that are incorporated into the project. Next is what is the zoning that should be approached or should be attached to this property? There's been some discussion about identifying and creating a new zoning, a master planned residential zone, similar to our master plan community zone, which we use for commercial and mixed use projects. But the thought was that that might be an approach that you might be willing to consider. The next question is the city willing to consider cluster development options that would include a variety of residential building styles, townhouses, and single family, commercial and church locations. Just a couple more here. And along with that, is the city willing to consider a transfer of development right program to transfer density from another property into this project? And of course, that would include some benefits that would accrue to the city with respect to that. The next one is the city willing to provide city services north of the Rocky Mountain Power Corridor. There's some 41.82 acres, and the range is 136 to 159 dwelling units. And lastly is the proposal consistent with the North Ogden General Plan. So with that, Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions or contribute in any way to the discussion.
And the applicant's representative is available, Mayor and Council. And if you're okay, I'll promote him to a panelist so he can interact with you, unless you have other questions for Rob.
Rob, I think just to clarify, as I read through this, you're saying this does comply with the general plan as far as you understand.
The general plan calls for this property to be annexed into the city. And then, of course, the general plan has lots of discussion about hillsides and the types of things that should go on as far as studies and determinations relative to how that overall project should be designed and developed.
I think one thing I noticed too, Rob, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the general plan called for a regional park in the area. But due to the steepness, that doesn't seem like that's something that would work in the development. And I think the developer has also stated that's the case, but is that my understanding correct?
The general plan map is not necessarily property specific. The general plan does call for some type of a park that's up on in and around that particular neighborhood. So it may or may not be a part of this project.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Before we hear from the applicant, council, do you have any comments or questions?
Rob,
Council Member Stoker?
how does this this plan fit in with the hillside protection plan that the city has? And what are the, go ahead.
Yeah, the applicant has provided a number of designs that include the slope analysis. They understand and realize that they'll need to do some of the more detailed design functions as far as geotechnical report, et cetera, that would need to be accommodated as part of this particular design. What we're hoping to accomplish tonight is just determine in broad terms what are the parameters that you would like to put in place.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think in our previous meeting and the minutes that were included, there were concerns just about from every council member about density and development above the power poles. So I know that's still on my mind. I'd like to accommodate the developer with some type of increased density over what the county would allow up there, which is approximately 185 units. But I think the 591 or 634 is way too dense for that area. Just, you know, I would like to, if we look at some type of development transfer, I'd like to see just thinking out loud here, a conservation easement above the poles. But I would not be in favor of any development above the power poles.
Rob, it's Blake Severing here. Are you there, Rob?
I am.
So this question, one thing that I had on my mind, it says, is the city willing to provide city services north of the Rocky Mountain Power Corridor North? Is this planning on, are they planning on this being an HOA up there into the gated community? I would assume that.
There were several different options presented. One, the initial one was that city would provide services. Another option that was out there was to create that property north of the power line with a HOA or other mechanism to provide services up in that area. So that'd be a good question to ask the applicant and their agent.
Councilmember Severing, in discussion with Public Works, which is your assignment, they probably expressed it'd be very difficult for them to provide those services up there. So.
Yeah, I would be very concerned about being able to provide. I mean, I've been up there during the winter hiking, and I mean, even to what we have right now up on, I think it's Nebo Avenue, and it gets quite deep. So, you know, you're talking another, you know, several thousand feet. That would present a hardship on Public Works being able to provide that kind of service. So anyhow, thank you. I agree with the mayor. I personally feel like there shouldn't be any development above the power lines. And as I'm looking at my notes from our meeting we held with the Planning Commission, I don't see one person of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably about 9 or 10 individuals who didn't have a concern for the higher density and not allowing that much higher density. So with that, I appreciate your answer and just express my opinion.
Councilmember Ekstrom, did you have any comments?
Yes, I was having surgery when you get this kind of, you have the field trip and everything going. So I studied it quite a bit. And I too am concerned with that much density clear up on the hill. I mean, that you're going to get a lot of snow. It's going to be very difficult to get up there. That also presents a lot of non-permeable surface. And, you know, they've got the debris basins that look like on the north, which is going to be up the highest. Where's their water? Where's their runoff going? So that's another concern that I have. I noticed some discussion about putting some sort of commercial development up there, some sort of market or something, so that it would prevent or negate the need for them to have to come down the hill all of the time for getting basic things, which I think would be a good idea. But that's a lot of people up there. I would like to see something a little less dense, I think.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we should hear from the applicant. He might be able to answer some questions or maybe changes they've made. John, why don't we go ahead and let the applicant comment?
Okay, he should be popping up here on your screen. Yep, there he is, Bruce.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed the first couple minutes. I didn't know your first item had canceled, and I was waiting to join faithfully at 6:15, and I get this message from John saying, jump everything and join now. So I dropped everything and joined now. I think I only missed the first couple of minutes of your discussion. I apologize. Let me take some of those issues that I heard just generically. Assume we develop north of the power line, which we really would like to. It's a different style of development, and it would be an HOA-based service provision. We understand that it would be unfair and unreasonable to have the general taxpayers of the city paying for the provision of services north of the power corridor. So our plan was actually to make the stuff north of the power corridor a gated community. And generically, you can make enough money off of gated communities to pay for the provision of those services without any difficulty. And it would provide some phenomenal quality housing up there. We'd even try to put some townhomes in places where the topography would make for some spectacular views and would allow a broad range of mix of housing. So the theory, of course, is that, at least my primary theory is that there's a general tendency to fixate too much, I think, on the number of housing units as opposed to the quality of the housing units, how they're designed, how they're laid out, how they're planned. And the goal here was to not fixate on the raw number, except as that number drives certain things like impervious surfaces, traffic, etc., but to fixate instead, to focus instead on the quality of the layout, the thoughtfulness of the project, and make sure that we're giving you a project which has a wide variety of housing types, is thoughtfully laid out and thoughtfully designed. And certainly we're not locked into every particular number of unit that we've proposed here, but we think that the concept of how we came to those numbers is good by buffering from the project below it, clustering some designs, putting appropriate product where it belongs on the topography. And we think in that regard that the design is pretty good. Now, obviously, we're certainly ready, willing, and able to discuss what the council's numbers are. And we'll ask for more, and I'm sure you'll ask for less. I've rarely seen a council ask for more, and I've rarely seen a developer ask for less. And somewhere in the middle is hopefully where we can wind up. What I always tell clients is to try to ask for somewhat more than you really need and be willing to settle for somewhat less than you asked for, somewhat less than you think you're going to wind up compromising on. And I hope, again, that the council worries about the quality of the plan rather than just raw numbers, because I can tell you I've been in projects where cities have 2-acre houses, for example, and I won't mention a particular jurisdiction, but every one of those 2-acre houses looks like Arkansas, with four junk cars and 2 trashed boats parked up on an unmaintained lot. So the size of the lot doesn't necessarily equal the quality of the design or the maintenance or the people there. So we would focus on the latter rather than the former. In terms of the commercial, we've left the commercial piece there simply as a take it or leave it. It was suggested by some members of the council and some prior staff as a good idea. It was also suggested by some members of the staff and some members of the council and the planning commission as the dumbest idea on the history of the planet. And our position is we are not wedded to that one way or the other. We can see pros and cons to both solutions. And frankly, as to the commercial, you tell us what you want and we'll do whichever version that you want. In terms of the regional park, Rob is correct that somewhere in the general area of the mountain, close quotes, and pardon me, I keep dropping out of the screen because my camera's a little too far away from me. Somewhere in that area was supposed to be a large park, but the topo just simply doesn't work for what's known as a functional programmable park up there. It does work for some natural open space and some trails, and we've done a pretty good job, I think, of integrating natural open space, trails, parking lots for trails. And we think that the way we've laid it out is a pretty good basis to start the design. And thanks for bringing it up there. So there's just no place to put a flat programmable park there. I would point out that these houses would pay a large amount of impact fees and would be helping to put parks elsewhere. And parks don't all have to be of the same type. I mean, it's nice to have soccer fields and nice to have baseball fields, but it's also nice to have trailhead parking and great trails up to the north. And if you don't allow a lot of development up north, it sort of disincentivizes the ability to make it available and accessed and improved. One of the great ways that local governments can get trails and incentivize the mountain type of living and environment is precisely by allowing development. In Salt Lake City, I used to work on, when I was council, when I was John Call for Salt Lake City, doing the land use law for Salt Lake City, there was a big kerfuffle about the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. And you know, how can we have development and the trail together? Well, it turns out that the development was the best way to get the trail because the developers donated the trail, improved the trail, provided the parking, and made it available to everybody. Whereas if the development hadn't happened, much of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail wouldn't be there. So it's an incentive that works both ways. In terms of the other, Ms. Ekstrom, your question about detention basins, as you know, I'm sure, those what you're seeing up top are called debris basins, and those are different than detention basins. The debris basins are designed to pick off the stuff that may come down as a part of an avalanche or an excessive storm. As it relates to detention basins, we have to live with very, very strict new standards. It seems like every year, making detention much more strict. And while we haven't shown the detention basins in the lower area, that doesn't mean we're not going to detain, because as a matter of law, we have to detain. That's the distinction between the debris basins and the detention basins. So there will be full-blown detention, and that's the nice part, is I know your engineers, and they would require us to comply with both state law and best practices in terms of how the detention basin is. And as a matter of statutory law, we are not allowed to release greater flows in either terms of location or volume or quality or quantities of water than has historically flowed down there. We would actually, the development again will make the situation better by dealing with, by channelizing some of the flows and detaining other flows, or retaining some of the flows. So it would be planned as opposed to accidental. So we will take care of all of the detention. And one of the provisions in my standard development agreement, which I had the great honor of lecturing on development agreements at John and Craig Call's annual Land Use Institute last week, or about a month ago, I guess. One of the benefits of a development agreement is it specifically says that we will take into account, as we design the whole project, all the detention needs. So you're not going to get a situation where Project X comes in and develops 40 units, but accidentally screws it up and winds up dumping more units and more water onto another project. We would have to design it as a whole. So those are the issues that I heard. To the extent that I missed an issue, I apologize. If you want to bring it up, I'll try to deal with that answer. We'd like to move forward on getting this project approved through a development agreement. Well, that's one issue that Rob brought up, through a development agreement, and be able to start turning dirt in the spring for when the construction season happens. I'm a big believer in master planned community zones, and the reason I am is because no matter how sophisticated and multi-talented and multiverse, manifold, whatever phrase you want to use, your current zoning codes are, they can never do a good job of guaranteeing you that you're going to get what you want on a project of this size and on this topography. Whereas with a development agreement and a purpose-built zone, what you get is exactly what you see. And if you don't like the aspect of the pretty picture and it's reasonable, well, we'll change the aspect of that pretty picture in a way that we can agree on. If you think something should be 50 units and we think it should be 60, well, we'll try to agree on some number, but just throwing generic so-called Euclidean-based zones at it, in my experience, doesn't work, because people can always find ways around, no matter how carefully you write a zone, if you don't have a development agreement with standards, et cetera, some clever architect, some evil engineer, or some rotten lawyer, not me, will try to find a way to manipulate it. Whereas if you've agreed to it in advance, it's pretty hard to manipulate it beyond what you've agreed to. So I would strongly encourage you to go with a master plan community where the development agreement, the design standards, the engineering standards, and everything else becomes the zone for the project. It's not very hard to do. I've got a template for those zones and I've provided it to Rob and John. A lot of cities in the state use my development agreement as a standard template. And it takes care of all of the issues that you want. So just finally, killing everything above the power corridor is an awful big hit to a project like this. That's 20-25% of the project. And I think as long as we're taking care of the costly public services like snow plowing and everything like that, I don't see a reason why not to develop anything over the power corridor in a gated community fashion. So those are my comments. I appreciate you meeting there, and I apologize again for being like 2 minutes late on the call.
Thanks, Bruce. Anything else you'd like us to?
Only if I'm here to answer any questions, Mayor. I don't know if I guess I can check, but I've been so busy talking, I didn't notice whether Cammie Marriott was on or whether my engineer Matt was on or not.
John, are they on?
I don't see either of them on right now.
I don't see either of them on either. I just clicked on both the panelists and the attendees, and I don't see either of them on either. So you wind up getting me. But since I've done probably more of these types of projects in the state of Utah than probably anybody, I hope I can answer the questions.
Rob, I think you did a really good job here. You listed certain goals. Maybe we ought to, while we have Bruce on and the council, any concerns about the goals? They're listed on page 26 of the packet. You had 4 specific goals and then some housing goals. Maybe we ought to hear from anybody that would like to address those. Councilmember Ekstrom?
Yes, one thing I can say in favor of kind of mixing this development, my husband and I spent just a little trip and we drove around, Park City and Alta and some of those kind of resorty areas. And there was a lot of this kind of development, where they had, big, beautiful houses along with multifamily housing that really did just have these very spectacular views, up there in the mountains. So I have seen it where it does look really, really nice. So, that not having done that before, I would have been a lot more leery of it, but having seen it, I think it can work. So, I have a hard time envisioning it just from kind of this mock-up, but, from what I can see of their illustrations that they provided, they do look similar to the things that I saw, and I did really like them. So
Mayor, if I could go down these goals, I could address each one of these goals if that would help.
Why don't you take a few minutes, Rob, and do that just to make sure that
That'd be great. So in terms of goal number one, first bullet point, we would certainly be willing to do a road maintenance district, especially north of the power. We do that with an HOA. I've done other road maintenance projects where the developer contributes in some ways to a portion of the otherwise public roads. We are more than amenable to using the stormwater to the extent that we can return it. The interesting issue is you by definition have to at least let the pre-existing flows flow through and not go underground, because otherwise you're stealing downstream water. So you've got to sort of balance the issue of letting it enough go downstream, but not too much go downstream. And those are simply engineering considerations. And I've worked through those with quality engineers like we have on our team on other projects. Dark sky philosophy is something that I think is sort of almost a given nowadays. You wind up, I had an argument with a city a few years ago what they meant by dark sky, and I showed them that dark sky ranged all the way from Yosemite National Park dark sky to dark sky in Los Angeles. But we certainly believe that dark sky is actually an important selling point for the property, and it's my normal practice now to put in a dark sky exhibit to the development agreement that would say we would comply with dark sky through XYZ type of lighting structures and yard light controls. Goal number two, the first bullet point, is exactly what I talked about with the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. The way you get to public property is through private property, but you can only get through private property with the consent of the private property owner. So by allowing development, that's the precise way you get trails through that property, and we've shown them. And we're happy to work with the Forest Service and the city, and we've shown trailheads and trail access, and we're willing to work with the rest of that. Trails within the urban area, I don't know if that's necessarily appropriate to us because we're not so much part of the urban area, but certainly there would be hiking and biking and walking options where we are. Return of groundwater to the ground, I think that's really the same thing that we talked about. Parts of it are what we talked about before, adopting on-site water retention ordinances. And you can, again, adopt those as part of a condition to a development agreement. And water-wise landscaping, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, I've got a development agreement for another project in another location where we specifically had an entire section on design standards and sustainability. And one of those sustainability standards was water-wise landscaping. So again, it's quite easy to do. In terms of the potential instability of the soils, absolutely. What we would put in the development agreement is that there would need to be soil stability standards, and this includes some potential debris flow standards. You wouldn't need to do it through ordinance. We could do it by a development agreement, and that's pretty simple. There's natural parks. That's a little tricky on this site because I'm not really sure that there are natural parks, but we could identify areas that needed to be preserved as open space and try to cluster around them. And obviously, we have no intention of developing on permanently on hazardous areas. Some of the water flows would be channelized, of course, to remove the hazard. But otherwise, the last thing a developer wants to do, and believe me, I've gotten sued on behalf of developers for building on a geologically unstable portion because this was years ago before the standards were better. It's not a pretty thing to do. And there are certainly some portions where clustering techniques of development could and should be considered given the topography of the site. This is a really nice site in general, as you all know, because of its natural flows. It's just about the perfect slope for giving every row of houses an astonishing view. It slopes not too, it's sort of a Goldilocks slope, not too much, not too little. There's some pockets where it's a little bit more steep, and we'd either design around them like those townhomes that I talked about, which I've had clients build on some very steep areas, and frankly, they help with a little bit of, I won't call it affordable housing because they're $500,000 or $600,000, $700,000 houses, but they are more affordable, and they give you a mix of products, but they have just spectacular views. So every one of those goals, I think, is better implemented through a development agreement than it is through just base zoning. And if it's adopted, the fact that you allow some more density, more number of, I hate that word density, maybe a higher number of units than you would otherwise think appropriate, incentivizes the developer to do the kind of quality project that what you want. It's all a trade-off in this world when you're doing development between what you can afford to build and what you can afford to sell for. So we think you get better quality projects, as I mentioned earlier, meeting more of your goals by allowing slightly more density than you might otherwise feel comfortable with, as long as the attainment of those extra units is conditioned upon meeting the performance standards, the quality standards of the plan that we could work through. So that's my little tour through the goals, Mayor, and I think that was a good idea, and I read the goals as part of a review of the staff report. Going on the housing goals, we would increase, I think pretty easy, we increase the quality and the variety. This plan does exactly that. We put a mix of types of houses and product, and we're perfectly willing to agree to quality building and design standards. I think you can see the quality that's already on that hillside up there, and we have no reason to diminish that. So I think we meet housing goal number 1 as well. Any other goals there, Rob? I don't remember off the top of my head.
That was the summary that we thought were the critical ones for the council to consider.
That's what I thought. So we're just looking for your guidance to move to the next step, because in the end, this comes down to your vote. So, and again, pardon me, I keep vanishing out of this picture. If I move to the center where my camera is, I vanish out of the picture, which some people think that's good for me to vanish out of the picture, but other people were happy when I lost my voice a couple of weeks ago. So actually the first time I spoke in a week was at Craig's conference, Craig Call and John Call's conference. So anyway, those are our thoughts. We appreciate your guidance, and we'll take your guidance. Rob, this is being recorded, right? Yeah, it's recording live on YouTube. So Cammie and Matt can look at it, and we can come back with another iteration once we get your guidance. But we all know that we've got 5 of you on the call, which means we're going to get 12 different opinions from the council. But we're going to try to do our best to come up with whatever your consensus is, but I would beg you not to be overly restrictive.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Council, now I really like the outline of the goals here. I think if they can be accomplished, that would be first step. And if I heard Bruce right, he feels like none of those are too stringent in regards to a basis for a development agreement. Would that be a correct assumption, Bruce?
Yes, sir. As long as you don't tell me the density is 130 units.
We're more lenient than that, Bruce. That means the county will give you 185.
If I can tell you one funny story, at least I think it's funny. I was proposing a project for a client in Saratoga Springs several years ago, and we were asking for 1,800 units, and I can't remember, it was a lot of acres. And one council member at the meeting said, Mr. Baird, you know I'm going to ask you to cut your density on this project because that's what I always do. I said, well, council member, I understand you're going to do that. I have no authority on behalf of my clients to cut the density, but we're at 1,800 now. I promise you that if you say 1,799, I will break my client's legs to accept 1,799. And you get no prizes, Mayor or council members, for guessing what her motion was.
1799, how's that?
And you get no prizes for guessing whether my client said okay. And by the way, we'd already come down a decent number, so I'm not implying that we're at one fewer than what we put here, but we didn't over greedy this design to give us what I call insurance defense negotiation, where I started $1 and you started 2 million, and we hope to compromise somewhere in the middle. We started a little higher than where we hope to end up with, but not insultingly higher, and we did it with a rational basis. So yes is the answer. I'm confident that we can work relatively quickly through all of these designs. In fact, I think we created this last version having seen a list of these goals before and having designed it essentially intending to meet these goals in advance.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Appreciate your comments. You know, I think the clustering is something that makes sense in this type of development. My main concern, and as you know, I just give input, but I think the key thing in my mind is how we preserve the beauty of that mountainside. That is pristine to our city. I think it's part of the character of our city, and the main thing in my mind is the preservation of that beauty somehow. So, Councilman Swanson, we haven't heard from you this evening. Do you have a comment?
Does that shock you?
No, it doesn't shock me. I just appreciate your input.
I think it shocks the other council members.
That's okay. They can be shocked.
I see this as where we are right now as there's two sections for us to consider. I think we have the section above the power lines and we have the section below the power lines. And we really have two questions to ask in my mind there. And the first one being, do we or don't we want to have development above the power lines? That's going to have a major impact on the pencilability of this project and the viability of it, whether or not we allow or are willing to accept development above the power line. If we are willing to accept the development above the power line, to what degree do we want development above the power line? I don't think it's just as simple as saying, yes, okay, development above the power line, let's see what gets thrown at us. I think we need to lead out and say, this is the kind of density, clustering, whatever. I'm not suggesting those are the answers, but just throwing out terms. What are we willing to accept up there so that we're not wasting anybody's time? In the nearly 7 years I've been on the council, the phrase focus on the quality, not the quantity, has been one that has increasingly raised the hairs on the back of my neck because of what's happened with other developments and things like that. So while I understand, Bruce, why you would say that, and I certainly don't have any doubt about the quality of what you guys will provide, quantity is still an issue. And how much we allow up there, if anything, is still an issue. So in my mind, I think we ought to answer the first question, do we or don't we want something above the power lines? Right now, my answer is I don't know. I think it depends on what's proposed. What would be up there if we had large lots, which from a topographical standpoint is fairly difficult to do up there. I might be more willing than if there's more dense housing, townhomes, those kinds of things. Regardless of the quality and the cost of them, it's still going to be density up in that, as Mayor put it a moment ago, kind of a signature area of our community. So that's where I'm feeling at the moment. Once we answer those questions, then I think we talk about what zone would we allow to be applied there. If it's the master planned development within a development agreement, one of the overlays or something along those lines. And then we could get into, there's talk about transferable development rights. Where's the sending zone? Where's the zone that is going to be sending those development rights up there to increase density so that we have less density somewhere else? Where's that coming from? We haven't established that. I think the General Plan Steering Committee is working on that, but we don't have that yet. And so, and then the last question for me is commercial, and my answer there hasn't changed. The answer is no. For me, it's really pretty simple. Whether you live over by the mouth of North Ogden Canyon, in those homes there, you're 3 miles to the nearest store. If you're living up there, you're 3 miles to the nearest store. You know that when you buy the place. That's my feeling on the commercial.
I think Rob's also done a good job, and I think your points are well taken, Councilman. I guess if this is in a type of order, if you look at Rob's outline there, summary of land use authority considerations, maybe the first question is, and this fits into your comments, Phil, is, are we willing to annex that property in, and how far are we willing to annex it up? I mean, is it an all or nothing on the annexation? I believe we have the authority to determine how much we're going to annex into the city. And then this surely did address a lot of your other your comments, Phil. Is the annexation and zoning proposal consistent with the general plan? What land uses are appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. I think Rob's done a good job there. But maybe the key to this, and just to move the discussion along, is there anyone that objects to some type of annexation of that property into the city from the council? Okay. That seems to be willing to annex. I guess the second question comes into how much. So,
Mayor, can I ask a question of John?
Sure.
John and Bruce, chime in. I know that you have oodles of expertise in land use. So if we annex an area, what legal onus does that put on the city to allow development?
Well, it's the same level of onus that government in general has, which is we have to allow for an economical use of the property.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean that we have to do the only use or the use that that the landowner wants, but we have to allow some use.
Sure.
And the gray area is everything in between.
The United States Supreme Court has said that zoning is allowed as long as it doesn't, quote, go too far, close quote. And John and I and every other land use lawyer, I'm literally, that is the phrase. We have made our living and a very good living addressing what is too far, close quote. The simple answer is you have, and I never sugarcoat it because I always want my credibility to be intact. You have very broad discretion especially in terms of what you allow in an annexation, because in an annexation, if you don't want the property with what you want to put on it, all you have to say is, we don't want the property. Because the property comes in with whatever zone you put on it. And if you don't put a zone on it that we can't live with, then we won't come in. If you put a zone that we can live with, we'll come in. If you don't, then we won't. It's just that simple.
Thank you, Bruce.
Councilmember Barker, we haven't heard from you this evening. You have any comments or?
Yeah, a few. I personally think it's a good idea to annex it, and I would say annex it all, mainly because they already got a graph of what would happen if it stayed in the county. So if we said we only want to annex to the power lines, well, then above the power lines will stay in Weber County, and then they'll get developed as Weber County standards. I kind of think either way it's going to get developed. So and maybe Bruce and John can correct me in that thinking, but one way or the other, I think it's going to get developed. So I kind of like to say, let's annex it in and make sure we do the best we can as a city. Second, I kind of think density is too high. I like the density that the Cove Phase 1 has, which was 3.48 units to the acre instead of 3.7, which is not that far off. They're pretty close, but I still like it a little lower. I don't think the further up the hill we go, the denser it should get. But again, that's not far, and I'm in favor of clustering, especially in this area. It might make more sense to cluster and have a lot of more open space if we put houses closer together or build some townhomes in some areas. I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah, council member, my theory when I was John for Salt Lake is it's always better to have it in your control than somebody else's control. And my other rule on that is do it once, do it right. When you've got a master planned project, you can deal with the whole thing as opposed to trying to deal with 40 acres here and 60 acres there and 80 acres here. You don't get the same benefits for the city in a piecemeal development as you do for a master plan, and you certainly don't get any benefits if you don't control the whole thing. Well, I'm saying you don't get any, but you lose a lot of your benefits if you don't control the whole project.
Anything else, Councilman Barker?
Nope, that's it for now.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Council Member Stoker, do you have any further comments?
A couple. It makes sense on the annexation, so we can control it and Weber County doesn't. But my biggest concern, obviously, is with the others is the density, but also, and I think Bruce had a pretty good plan in place for the hillside, that it's protected and we don't go past. So we're in the dangerous area, and pretty soon all these really nice homes are sliding off the mountainside because we've interrupted the ground and keeping it stable. That's my concern. And I'm also with Councilmember Swanson, no commercial up there.
Severing, did you have any further comments?
Yeah, Bruce, so how many homes are actually planned? By my calculations, it looks like there's about 162 units that are going to be north of the power poles. Is that correct?
John, Rob, could you bring that up and zoom it in? I think that's correct, sir. Yeah, that's correct in my quick addition of it, with a lot of them being in those, not a lot, but a decent number being in the townhome pads and area P. So I think you calculated the number pretty closely.
I agree totally with no commercial. I'm kind of, I kind of liked Councilman Swanson's choice of words. he bristled when he heard the word quality versus quantity. To me, quality is determined by the quantity. We know that there's going to be a quality product. I just worry, to me, quality is also determined by how many units are there. And not only just for the individuals who live there, but for what I look up and see every day. So I'm not sure about my personal feelings on how many units ought to be north of the power poles, but that's something for me to continue to think about. But that's my thoughts, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Severing. Rob, how many units would the county zone allow above the power lines?
Let's see, probably about 42.
So the county allow 42 versus the request of 160. Just trying to put that in perspective.
They've given a range. The
Got it.
range they've given us is 136 to 159.
Okay.
That's what, Rob, that's what the county is giving us, that number?
Under county ordinance, that's based upon their ordinance right now. That's maximum number of units, I think.
That's correct.
Can they rezone it in the county though?
Nope.
Okay.
I guess they could do whatever they want, but they have no plans to.
You can always ask.
Yeah, you can ask, but I can tell you they have no plans to. Councilmember Ekstrom?
Yeah, I just wanted to pose a few preemptive questions just based on, I'm the new one here, but almost every time something like this, a development that's going to have a lot of people coming in, we have residents expressing concerns for these particular things. The first is, what are the demographics? Are you going to have school-age children? And then do you have a coordinated plan with the district to make sure that there's plenty of school space for them? And then the other is traffic. So it's like, how many cars are we going to have? Do we have a current plan in place so that it will accommodate all of these new cars coming in that area? And maybe that's more of a question for John. And then Bruce, maybe for you about, what do you know about what age group we're going to be having, and if they're going to be, again, school age children, that is going to impact the schools.
It's probably hard to project, I guess, depending on who buys, but those are surely legitimate questions, Councilmember Ekstrom. Rob, could you tell me what the main thoroughfare would be to get up there? I'm trying to get up into the cove, obviously, is not an easy thing to do. What would be the main thoroughfare up here?
Probably 800 East, Mayor.
There's a couple of roadways. I think one of them is Jackson, and I can't read the other one.
But going from south to north up the hill, would it be 800?
That sounds right.
Which is an interesting street in itself. If I'm understanding right here, it seems like the design, the annexation, the goals that have been outlined are all acceptable. Once again, it seems like it boils down to the quality issue based upon how it's designed, and there seems to be two issues. I think Councilmember Swanson indicated that is what above the power poles. We know what the county would let them do up there. I do like the design of the clustering. I like the layout, the quality of the homes. So I think it comes down to those two issues. I think we've answered the issue with somebody is feeling differently. Commercial off the table. Anybody object to that? So it seems like that's what it comes down to then, to me, is above the poles, and if so, what? And the number of homes. We're trying to quit using the term density, I guess. Those seem to be the two issues. I'm not sure we have an answer for those tonight, Bruce, but I think we probably need to have some type of work session to decide that. I think it'd be tough to decide on that. I think you've heard that it's something less than what you've proposed. We need to focus in on that, I think, and what we want to do above the power lines, if anything. Those seem to be the two issues that are on the table.
Yeah, I think we've got, Mayor, I think you guys have all been very helpful, and I think your questions have been very, very candid and insightful. They're not things we didn't anticipate, but we wanted to make sure we heard them from you. What I'm going to suggest is that, if it's all right with you, that I make sure that Cammie and Randy and Matt take a listen to this call, and my hope is to come back to you sort of with I guess it's not politically correct to use the phrase Chinese menu anymore, but somewhat of a Chinese menu dealing with the issues that you talked about. Obviously, we'll take the commercial off. As I said, we didn't care so much about that to begin with. We were putting that there for other reasons. And we can come back to you with some thoughts on density. Obviously, you don't want to bid against yourself too much, but we can get back to you in the relatively near future. Hopefully in the, I don't know whether we'll be able to get back to you before Christmas or not, but we're going to try to get back to you in the next couple of weeks, and then maybe hold a meeting. I don't know, what would be the next council meeting?
December, what is it? First Tuesday in December, John? Is that the
Tuesday the 8th?
8th?
The
Yeah.
first is a work session, the 8th is a regular meeting, and then the 22nd is a regular meeting.
Okay, so there's a chance we could get back to you by the 22nd, in time for you to have it in a meaningful way, so you could have a thoughtful staff report like Rob has given you this time. You can try to isolate these issues a little bit more. It is an iterative process, and I think we can get together and come up with, as they say, reason together. And I think we're getting closer. We now know one thing you definitively don't like, and we know where the real questions are. So I think we can give you a presentation specifically targeted at those goals and the questions that you raised.
Bruce, maybe just a thought as one of the menu items you've referenced is maybe if the council says, they feel okay about going above the power corridor, maybe there's some lesser density up there, maybe a little bit greater than what the county would allow. And then maybe we can talk about some higher density down below to offset.
Yeah.
I think it was Council Member Swanson talked about the two types of approach above and below the power corridor. So maybe give that some thought.
I think that makes sense, Mayor, and we can certainly look at that.
And then Rob, what about the creation of a zone to handle something of this nature? It'd be, I think, somewhat new to us. Could you work on kind of an outline of what the zone would look like for a presentation to the council to consider?
Sure. If I could add one other thought, and that is the idea, maybe this is something for Bruce to take for homework, and that is if we do a gated community on the north end, and I know the Planning Commission and this council has said many times that they do not want to preclude access to public lands up there, that could be a little bit of a challenge.
Oh, absolutely. We could figure that out. The way we would do that is we would have trails, and I've built trail situations through private communities. I've structured it so that there's trail access through the community, around the community, and that's certainly an issue, Rob, that we can consider and deal with.
And Bruce, would you, I think you've seen the goals that were outlined there that Rob
Yes, sir.
did in his good write-up. Could you make sure you give us adequate information to address how you would
Absolutely.
make sure those goals are accomplished?
Absolutely, sir. That's why I thought that was very helpful. We'll give more detail on all of those things. There is always this paradox of some of these places, like in the upper right-hand corner, where a decent amount of density is, as it shows in this picture. Those are so perfect for townhomes. But it does drive some more density up above there. So we'll try to square that circle. Yeah, that pod U out there. But we'll try to square that circle, and we'll try to get back to you on all of those things. Recognizing, of course, that you guys recognize this, but a lot of people don't. Doors don't necessarily equal dollars, because you don't get the same bang for the buck as you do in higher density projects. Sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less. But we will come back to you with detailed responses on all of these issues and try to give you more detail as fast as we can. And if we can make the 22nd, we'll make the 22nd. But my theory is we need to give it to you a couple weeks in advance so that Rob would have a chance to do a staff analysis, maybe a week in advance, a staff analysis, and you guys would have a chance to read it before the meeting. So if we make the 22nd, we do. If we don't, we don't.
Okay, well, we'll be ready. And just one thing to consider when you come back to, Bruce.
Yes, sir.
I'm a real advocate of, could you explain to us when you come back and to our citizens, we like to engage in win-win situations.
Yes, sir.
And how this would benefit our community, and maybe what you could do to help enhance our community other than just build homes on the hillside there.
I understand. I understand it's, I have to be a little careful, Mayor, on a project I'm trying to do in another jurisdiction. My client offered to help build a town hall for the town. And the opponent, Summit County, in that case, has literally accused us of trying to bribe the town of Hideout.
No looking for bribes, even though we are looking for a public safety building, but we're not talking about that degree. I think just an explanation of how, how this is going to be a win-win situation, how this is going to benefit our city.
I understand, Mayor, and you'll pardon me if I swear one time on this phone call.
You're allowed one, and two if
that's
you
all.
if you behave.
The county's allegations in that case are insane bullshit. It's crazy, and I was just offering that as we're perfectly willing to try to make this a win-win situation, and we understand that's how annexations work. That's how my theory is. Development should be a partnership between good developers and good cities. And I'm proud to say that I don't know of a project, and I've probably done, I think, 60,000 homes for development agreements. I know of one that I've done where the community retrospectively doesn't like it. Every other project, it's been a plus, it's been a win-win.
Well, yeah, if you just include that in your write-up of
Yes,
how you
sir.
view this being helpful to the city, and
Absolutely.
that's our job as the council to make sure that we're fair and equitable to all parties involved, and that's kind of the approach we take. So
We understand.
Thank you.
To balance private property rights with public interests, and we'll get back to you. And I look forward to another helpful discussion.
I can tell you the members of this council do believe in property rights. They also believe in making sure we keep our community a great place to live. So,
Mayor?
Yes, is that you, Councilman Swanson?
It is. In the comments that were made a little bit earlier, it was the north section that was 136 to 159 units, correct, above the power line?
Yes, sir.
That's my understanding.
Okay. I don't know how the rest of council feels, but I'd like to see something in the neighbor of 80 to 90. just so that, instead of just taking a stab at the dark, at least from my perspective, that's something I could probably live with up there, and maybe some more density lower below to make up. But that's kind of a general ballpark for me.
Okay, thank you.
92? Did you say 93? I mean, 94?
80,
See,
81,
Hey,
79,
Bruce, Bruce,
78.
this is how we negotiate.
97?
You go up, we go down. So the higher you go, the lower we go.
Let's see, the county will do 42. I'll give you 46.
I'm just kidding, Mayor, and I know Councilmember Swanson was exchanging the same joke, so.
And I think that, our approach is, we surely want to be reasonable and give more density than the county. There's no
just
doubt
kidding.
about that. No, we know you were, and we were too. That's kind of how one developer kept complaining about something we asked. And so, the more he complained, the more it kind of cost him. So
Yeah, I don't generally.
we want to work together and make this something that's a win-win situation. So you've heard Councilman Swanson.
I have.
He's on the top 80 to 90. And that's when he's in a good mood tonight. So
I saw a little bit of nodding of heads along with that. So and I didn't say yes, but we'll work on. We understand pain thresholds. So
I think it gives you a general idea of what kind of the council's thinking. So we'll look forward to your proposal with specifics on how you can meet those goals and how we can make this a win-win for the city.
Thank you all, and have a nice Thanksgiving, and please stay safe.
All right, Bruce, you too. Be careful.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Good night.
Bruce.
Thanks for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Good
Thank you all.
comments,
Good night.
and good discussion.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, council, for your involvement in that discussion, and hopefully we can come back with something that's acceptable and will meet the goals of keeping North Ogden a great place to live. And thanks for all your input. John, is JD with us?
Yes, he is.
All right, let's go back to item number 3 then, and let JD give his comments and suggestions for us to consider. And thanks for joining us, JD. How's the new baby?
Doing well. She's doing good. Thanks for asking.
She's a cutie.
Yeah. We're in a good time of life, that's for sure. And apologies for being late. I'm the type that's usually 5 to 10 minutes early to a meeting, so I had my wires crossed, and here we are. So sorry about that.
Do you have a note from Lauren?
Yeah, I can get that provided to you.
All right, if you just submit that at your earliest convenience.
Yeah.
All right,
Sounds good.
Go ahead, JD.
Okay, thanks. So, hey everyone, my name is JD Dalpass. I'm a North Ogden resident, and the reason that I'm coming to you guys tonight is I sent out an email to the city council about a week ago regarding some ideas on garbage services, and kind of let me tell you why this idea came to my mind. I recently noticed that we needed an additional bin at our house, so I called the city, got some pricing, and they said, okay, it's either going to be $19.27 for a black can, or you can get a blue can for $5.06 a month. And that naturally kicked off an idea in my mind that there's a disparity in the city in pricing. So I just wanted to show some things. So John, do you want to move to the next slide? So some basic findings, some of the things that you may have heard in previous council discussions. I know this has been discussed to a degree, but I just want to recap. Municipalities in general have seen a huge increase in volumes of residential trash, upwards of 30% extra since the beginning of the pandemic. Also, something that we need to note is when we went to do a new contract with Republic Services, I believe that we saw an additional increase in the rate when we re-upped. And then another thing that's happened to us, since we have so much additional garbage right now, we are seeing that the Weber transfer station is taking more money from us because we have such a big increase in the volumes of garbage. So as has been previously stated in other council meetings, I believe that increase was about $70,000 extra than we were planning last year. So I hopefully this doesn't get too confusing, but try to stay with me a little. So the idea was that if you call the city to buy or to rent a second garbage can each month, if you do a black one that has weekly pickups, that's going to be $19.27 a month. If you do a blue garbage can, it's only $5 per month. And so if you start to break out the numbers, you know, how much per month times 12 months and divided by 52 pickups or divided by 26 pickups, there's a pretty big difference in the amount. And I always thought that the black and blue cans were different in size just by looking at them, but apparently not. The black and blue cans are equivalent capacities of 100 square feet. So I just wanted to kind of show that to begin, that there's an obvious issue in the amount that we're charging for our additional cans. John, will you go ahead? So here are a few ideas that I've kind of rattled off in my mind. So I've come up with a few different things. It doesn't mean that the city has to do any of this, but it's some ideas that I'd really like you to consider if possible. The first thing is we need to equalize the black and blue prices. I mean, it's literally has to be exactly the same in my mind. So I just put a small increase in the amount that the black can cost per month, and then I put a more reasonable increase to the blue can cost, just to show that it's basically the equivalent value. So if we were to, so Dave Espinoza was able to provide some great information to me that I've been able to go off of. One of the things that he told me is that there's 840 black cans that are out there, extra cans. So if we did a 73-cent increase, times it per month, and then times it by 12 for the year, that's $7,300 extra for the year. And then the blue cans, there's about 273 of them out there. So if we increase the price on that, it'd be about $5 a can, $1,300 a month, and about $16,000 per year. So even if we just did a simple change in the structure for the extra cans, we're already making $23,000 extra than we were this year, based off of a very simple and what I feel is a fair change to the residents. And I don't know exactly how this worked when we went from recycling, but I guess that this disparity has something to do from that switch of when we went from recycling to garbage. It's probably that we just, maybe it was an oversight, or that we didn't see that there was an essential change in the way that this is done. So it just gets it to normal. The other thing that I don't really want to have people showing up to my house with torches and pitchforks, but we need to look at the idea of increasing the rates just because prices have gone up so much. So the other thing that you could consider is if everyone, you know, had a $1 increase on their bill per month, that would be an additional $75,000 in revenue approximately, because there's 6,300 cans in the city. And if we did a 50-cent increase, it would be obviously half of that, so about $37,000. And John, go ahead and move on. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to mention is there are some ideas that we may be able to save some money as a city by doing different things. Some of this has been mentioned, some of it hasn't in other meetings. One of the ideas that I believe has been mentioned in other meetings, and I just wanted to recap, is, you know, do we allow the green waste pit to accept grass clippings? I think it's really difficult to say, you know, how many tons of capacity in the garbage system that would save in any given year. But I think it's a discussion that would be good for you guys to have, just to say, you know, if maybe we would lose a little bit of revenue in the green waste pit by doing something like that, but maybe the revenue lost would actually be not as big of a deal as the additional capacity that we're taking on as a city at the waste station. So that's one thing I'd want you to take a look at. And then the other thing is we just recently added the recycle dumpsters at the North Ogden, the old North Ogden Public Works Center. And right now, as that is, the city is paying approximately $330 per month. And that gives us 3 pickups from that dumpster per week. So essentially, I think if we were to add additional dumpsters, if we feel like that would make our overall weight go down, and if we looked to see if that was worth it, that's something that could be considered. The last one, I don't know how this would work, but I did want to mention it. I recently realized that I could pay my water bill by credit card. And so I started calling over to the city because I'd rather pay with a credit card and get points on it, right? So I started paying by credit card, and I don't want to be assessed an additional fee, but I think it's worth discussion because I don't know how much money the city is being charged by accepting credit cards. So an example that I would give you, my wife runs a small business. She told me that on her Square reader or whatever she uses, she has a 2.7% processing fee. So if you had an $80 bill for water, that would be about $2 that is lost from the city. I know that, Questar Gas, Rocky Mountain Power, a lot of the other entities that are providing other services to us, if you were to call them and say, hey, I want to pay by credit card, they usually charge you at least $1, up to maybe $3 just to run a credit card. So I just wanted to throw that out as well. And that's about it. I just appreciate you guys taking some time to look at these findings.
Thanks, JD. Very well thought through. Any questions for JD? I think he's brought up some issues that we'll be going into budget season here pretty quick. And one of the things I think, JD, is on the blue cans. We've kind of looked at that as enticing the citizens to keep those cans in case we go back to recycle. So we'll have Evan look at that too. I think Evan's with us tonight, isn't he, John?
Yes.
So if it's okay, JD, why don't we have our Director of Finance take your comments and suggestions and do a little bit further analysis on that and then let us discuss it. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that would be okay. I know that there's a packed agenda, but it would be kind of nice to hear if any of the city council people have any initial thoughts from this, because it may be completely new to them, or they might have been thinking of some of these things. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we'll have a discussion on that. I just wanted to, let you know, probably won't come out with a decision tonight, but I think it's good to have input from the council. So let's start with Council Member Barker, see what his comments are.
I actually spoke with our Public Works Director, Dave Espinoza, and I know he's on the call. He'll be able to speak as well today. I wasn't under the impression that since we stopped recycling, we were still allowing the second blue can as an option. And so my recommendation with Dave and the city is no longer allow that as an option. We're only losing the money really on the second cans. And if we do allow a second blue can, then I agree with JD that we should raise the rates to be equivalent to what the black can would be. So I'm in favor of that, but I just don't think we should offer it as a second option, except for everyone that already has one now. And also I asked Dave if he would, I was curious as well about grass clippings. He's going to watch the next 3 or 4 months when there's no grass clippings going in the garbage cans to see what our tipping rates will be compared to what they have been in the summer. I think it's something we need to talk about in the spring, because we've already talked that we need to maybe change how we utilize our green waste, and whether we do a punch pass or a season pass, whatever. But I think it's going to be more conversation as we move into springtime.
I think that'll give us a chance to gather some data on there's a difference, although it won't be real pure because we'll have a lot of stuff going in there during the holidays, but I think that's a good idea. Anything else, Council Member Barker?
Nope, that was it.
Thank you. Council Member Stoker, do you have any comments?
I'm just still kind of curious as to, how the garbage pickup is still going with the flyer that was put out on the cans. You can't have garbage overflowing. The lids have to be closed, and and no garbage outside of the cans around it. That I'm just kind of still curious as to see how that's working. And if it isn't working, then that needs to have a discussion on what we do, or if it's not, then why do we have it in place if there's no, I guess, consequence to that they just still do the same as they've always done.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
Nope.
And John, I believe we'll be sending an RFP out for garbage service here around the first of the year, and some of the questions that we may want to have discussed are some of the things JD's brought up on what we can do to be more efficient and some of the qualifications. Let's go with Council Member Ekstrom if we could. Do you have any comments, Charlotte?
Yeah, I think JD's analysis is really solid. And I completely agree with him. Since we're now using both cans for garbage, I think probably these rates were established when we were, maybe recouping some money when we were recycling, but then those numbers flipped and changed. And so I think it's time that our rates reflected what is currently happening. And I think it's really reasonable. I think also to increase just garbage in general, because we've just gotten so much more. If it's costing us more, we kind of, it's a fee for service kind of thing, so that rate can be passed on. And I'm looking at adding $1 or however much he added to the regular garbage pickups that everybody has is certainly just kind of in line with the increase that we saw from our contract that we had to pay. So yeah, I think his suggestions I think are great. I love that Ryan asked Dave about, kind of seeing the difference between having grass in dumpsters and not. I would love to encourage the residents to use the green waste and to get their grass clippings up there. Hopefully they would. I think maybe it's just so convenient to just stick it in their dumpster. I don't know how many more people will stick it in their cars and bring it up there, but we can certainly try and incentivize them to do that. So yeah, that's it for me.
Then John, just to refresh my memory also, that blue can right now that is out there is kind of an accommodation to the city in regards to a kind of a placeholder for potential recycling also. So we probably need to consider that in the discussion too.
And also a storage issue. If we had to collect, if half the people in the city decided they didn't want the second can, we would now have 3,200 cans roughly to pick up and try and store. And that would be an impossibility at the city level.
Yeah, that's what I say. I think that was an accommodation to the city with hopes that the recycling returns, but it's so timely because, as JD's pointed out, garbage volume has increased so dramatically that it's probably been a blessing to a lot of city people in our city to have that. So, Council Member Swanson, did you have further comments?
Yeah, several. Jay, first of all, JD, thank you for your presentation. I think that's wonderful. I did see some torch carrying folks headed up the road here. I couldn't see what they had in their hands other than torches, so I think maybe they're headed your way.
Yeah, hopefully, it's a little dark, but hopefully that's all it is.
Well, they'll find you. The thoughts that I had were first of all, as we're talking about garbage collection in general, it's no different than water or sewer. As residents, we are purchasing a service. It's not just something that is nice for the city to provide. We're all paying for a service to be brought to our homes, running water, taking the sewer out, having the garbage hauled away. It's a service. It's like ordering a pizza from Pizza Man. We pay to have something brought to our door or something taken away. And I think we lose that sometimes and forget that we are purchasing a service. So we have to cover the costs that are inherent with providing that service. The as I remember, one of the big reasons that our blue can rate was so low was that we were trying to drive people to separate their garbage. Back when the recycling was, you could recycle just about everything, including greasy pizza boxes. We were trying to encourage people to take that, and instead of getting a second black can, use the blue recycling or get a second recycling can. That obviously isn't the situation that we're in now. I'm pretty sure, just looking at the economy and everything else, that when we get this RFP back next here after the first of the year for garbage, that we're going to see another increase over what we just saw with for public services, regardless of who bids on it. I think we're going to see another substantial increase. And I think we need to be thinking about the question Mayor raised. There's an accommodation that the residents are making for us in storing a blue bin at their home for us. But at the same time, it's being used as a garbage bin, and we ought to consider whether or not an appropriate raise in the cost for that can is to be had. Or do we just leave it where it is? But I think those are all important questions that we need to ask in the budget season that's just right around the corner.
And I think JD's got a good point in his analysis too about why would somebody not request a second blue can?
Right.
So I think that needs to also be taken into consideration as we do that. And I can tell you that I just completed a Weber Central District Sewer Board meeting, and they're not shy about increasing property taxes and service fees. I think we've been very conscientious, and this has been an unusual year in the solid waste enterprise fund because of everything that's gone on. And we do have some balance there. We'll see how it comes out, but good points. Thanks, Councilman Swanson. We haven't forgot you, Council Member Severing. Have you got any comments?
Well, I was just going to say thanks to JD. Appreciate your insight and your interest in doing the calculations and making this presentation. Thank you for being a valuable part of North Ogden citizenry, JD. Appreciate you.
All right, JD, anything else you'd like to tell us after you've heard comments from the council? I think it surely merits looking at every one of your things here. The credit card situation, I know that in some cases, Visa and MasterCard have some prohibitions against charging more for the use of a credit card. So we'll also look into that and go from there.
Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with the discussion. This has been a pretty enthralling conversation about our trash. I mean, there's nothing I'd rather talk about. So thank you.
Mayor, you muted yourself.
That's the preference of most people, that I'm muted, but thanks for reminding me. All right, Evan and John, I think you've heard the council tonight, and let's incorporate and research these ideas of JD's, and let's make sure that we put this on the agenda for a future council meeting, particularly as we look at the budget, as was mentioned. We could immediately, I think, look into the credit card issue, if somebody could look into that and get back to us. I know it's not prohibited in all cases, but I think the contracts with Visa and MasterCard have some prohibitions. Since they're kind of monopolistic, they kind of make the rules. All right. Once again, JD, thank you for a great work. And as Council Member Severing talked about, thanks for your involvement in our community and a desire to make it better. We appreciate that. And good luck with that new baby. She's a beauty.
Thanks. Yeah, have a good one.
Thank you. Let's go to item 5 on our agenda. The presenter will be Evan Nelson, our Director of Finance, and he is going to discuss action on hazard pay for public safety in regards to the CARES Act. So Evan, why don't you go ahead? John, is Evan with us?
He is, but I actually have to unmute him, so that's my fault.
No problem.
You should be able to unmute yourself, Evan.
And just as a reminder, as he's unmuting and getting ready to prepare, Councilman Barker has indicated he will recuse himself from the vote that we get to. However, we would appreciate his input. John and myself did have a great opportunity to meet with Jeremiah Jones and Chief Wade and Fire Marshal Barker and had a very, I thought, good discussion. That's one thing, maybe at the start of each meeting, John, we could ask the question, but just put it on the agenda. If there's any conflicts of interest, maybe they could be stated at the beginning of the meeting in regards to any agenda items.
Okay.
So with that, Evan, are you with us?
I'm here.
All right, take it away.
Okay. So the council has already authorized the expenditure of our CARES grant funding that we've received, but we wanted to come back to you for some clarified guidance on how to approach the hazard pay that has been discussed. We talked about providing some hazard pay to our public safety officers, and then we've also received a request from the fire district for hazard pay for their employees as well. Just to give you a little bit of context, I wanted to share just a brief part of the guidance that we have from the Department of Treasury related to hazard pay. So this says, hazard pay may be covered, covered by grant funding if it is provided for performing hazardous duty or work involving physical hardship that in each case is related to COVID-19. Hazard pay specifically may only be covered to the extent it is related to COVID-19. For example, a recipient may use payments from the fund to cover hazard pay for a police officer coming in close contact with members of the public to enforce public health or public safety orders. But across the board, hazard pay for all members of a police department, regardless of their duties, would not be able to be covered with payments from the fund. So there's more detail besides that, but those were kind of some key points that I wanted to read just to give us all a better understanding of the guidance that we have. The guidance is not as strict when it comes to covering regular pay and regular benefits for public safety employees. Those expenses have been deemed to be completely eligible for use of CARES Act funding. So we put together a proposal. The dollar amount that was discussed with the council was $1,500 made available per officer on average. And because we can't just do an across the board payment, we felt like it needed to be tied to hours rather than just an amount a lump sum per employee. So we talked about an average of $1,500 per employee that would be translated into an hourly dollar amount. And that $1,500, when we add the employee benefits to it, turns into approximately $2,111. And then when we multiply that by the number of eligible employees in the police department, we came out to $38,000. So there's a question to answer, and that one question is, how much per employee on average is the council interested in putting toward hazard pay? Now the staff report goes the next step and translates the dollar amount into an equivalent payment for the fire district. And it's the equivalent payment is based on the 42% that I think 42% is our percent of call volume, if I understand that correctly. And so we use that 42% to translate the $2,111 into a dollar amount for the fire district employees, which the number we have is 31 employees. So that if 31 employees are eligible, with that 42% translation, the total comes out to $27,485. So the council, you're free to, set the amount you want to spend on hazard pay. Whatever CARES Act money we don't spend on other things will be applied toward regular public safety wages and benefits. We won't have any problem spending all of the money. So those are kind of that's the situation we're in. One other thing that we would like some guidance from the council on is eligibility as to which type of employees should receive hazard pay, whether that is to include frontline employees, supervisors, office staff, those kinds of questions. In the initial calculation that we did for the police department, office staff and I believe the chief and the lieutenants were excluded from that calculation. So we focused our calculation on just frontline employees that are actually out in the public. And so that would like to know dollar amount for the public safety, dollar amount for fire departments, and then which employees should be eligible for this.
Hey, Evan, if I understood your reading of the statute or whatever they call it these days, it talked about specific, they had to be interfacing with the public. Could you just once again read that qualification?
Okay. Hazard pay may be covered if it is provided for performing hazardous duty or work involving physical hardship that in each case is related to COVID-19. Hazard pay specifically may only be covered to the extent it is related to COVID-19. For example, a recipient may use payments from the fund to cover hazard pay for a police officer coming in close contact with members of the public to enforce public health or public safety orders. But across the board hazard pay for all members of a police department, regardless of their duties, would not be able to be covered with payments from the fund.
Yeah, I think that gives the substance of what the expectation is, and that would limit who that could be paid to, particularly in the police department. John, before we ask the council for their comments too, we committed that to the chief and the fire marshal that we would pass on to the council the pertinent points of our discussion and their concerns. So we could either have Councilman Barker do that or yourself. John, why don't you take a shot at it? And Councilman Barker, if you would support John, make sure we don't miss anything.
And he says support, and I would say correct me when I'm wrong. So like the mayor said, we had a good conversation. There were several items discussed. ranging from their goal is to pay their employees $2 per hour for hazard pay for all hours they worked from March through December 30th. So that would include some time, which we don't actually know the hours on, but we do have an estimate of that time because of the way their schedules work. To put that into perspective, most of our regular employees at the city work 2,080 hours. The police officers actually work almost 2,300 hours, and firefighters work almost 3,000 hours. It's just over 2,900 hours. And so the request at $2 an hour for each of those employees times the 2,900 hours is what comes out to what Evan has shown you. For our portion of the 42% at $65,000. The fire district does have more employees, and their position, or the discussion we had, is that the fire chiefs, the deputy chief and the fire chief, as well as the fire marshal, are all available for calls as they come in to go out and interact with the public. And then also in the paperwork provided, it indicated that there's some risk of exposure to office staff as well. And so their position is they would like to provide hazard pay to all their employees, and at that rate of $2 an hour. And with the call volume, I think Evan mentioned at 42%, that means that they're requesting the 65,000 from North Ogden City as our contribution to that hazard pay. In that discussion, we also talked about Chief Jones, for example, had done some surveying of other communities on what the hazard pay that was being offered by some of local agencies, and I think some others. And his impression was that most agencies are getting more than the roughly $1,500 that we've authorized for the police officers. And then as we discussed it, it also seemed that most agencies were treating officers and firefighters the same as far as compensation for hazard pay. So those are about 5 different bullet points mushed together. What else did I miss? Fire Marshal Councilman Barker?
I think you about got it. I think those are the main points that Chief Jones was worried about. And just to clarify, the reason the fire district wants to have the chiefs be added in for the hazard pay is, in our surveying other departments, they always stop at the battalion chief level. Our department's so small, we don't have that position. And so our chiefs, myself included, we still respond on calls. I don't know how many I've seen of you when I've been on a fire or on a traffic accident. If there's anything up on the divide, we go on multiple calls in a week. So that's why they've put that in. And our office staff, we feel is in a hazardous position because we have no protection and we've never closed our offices. There's no way to put up protection or plexiglass around our office staff, just the way our department's designed, that we do what we can, always wear masks and everything else, but it's hard to protect them.
Councilman Barker, how many people come into the station? What would be their purpose for coming in, to get a burn permit or?
No, so we have chimney brushes that we let the citizens borrow in the wintertime. So we get people coming in to borrow chimney brushes to clean their chimneys. Today, I think there was 4 or 5 people that came in for numerous things. I'm meeting with contractors, developers all the time, going over plans in my office. The chief has other people. It's about 4 or 5 people a day, probably, if not more. It's hard to. I'll start counting if you'd like.
No, I'm just saying, we made the decision to do a lot of those meetings Zoom wise to protect our employees. As the discussion was going on, I thought about it when we talked about our lieutenants and the chief. as I recall, in January, our chief was the one that was out on the road and was involved with our friend from the Aryan Nations. And I think our lieutenants probably, based upon the thought process of the fire department, or the fire district, our lieutenants could be subject, our chief could be subject. They would go on calls as necessary, even though they're probably not as general in nature as a regular officer. Evan, could you also, or you, John, report to the council on the Department of Labor issue in regards to hourly amounts having to be paid at overtime?
Mayor, before we get there, can I ask a question?
Always.
Evan, can you go back and read the two statements about what the CARES Act money can be used for?
Okay. Hazard pay may be covered if it is provided for performing hazardous duty or work involving physical hardship that in each case is related to COVID-19. Hazard pay specifically may only be covered to the extent it is related to COVID-19. For example, a recipient may use payments from the fund to cover hazard pay for a police officer coming in close contact with members of the public to enforce public health or public safety orders.
Stop right there. Doesn't that statement there greatly limit? It says specifically that hazard pay can be used, and it gives the example of an officer coming in contact with the public, and it doesn't stop there. It says specifically to enforce public health or safety orders. If I'm not mistaken, and John, this is probably where the attorneys are going to have to step in, but writing a traffic ticket is not enforcing a public health order or a public safety order related to COVID-19. Neither is responding to an accident as a firefighter. My question is, I'm not trying to find a way to not pay our guys and gals. I want to pay them. My question is, are we now in an indefensible position? Should we be audited by the federal government, who comes in and says, okay, you covered all of these hours from March through the end of December, and well, that traffic accident was not enforcing a public order. That ticket was not enforcing a public order. I'm wondering what teeth or what vulnerability we end up having because of that statement that they intentionally put in there.
And Councilman Swanson, when we asked him to read it again, I'm glad you picked that up. That is a concern. In addition, we've made the comment that when you talk about enforcing, our approach has been if somebody calls us, but we are not going to be proactive in the enforcement of the governor's health order. And so I think that's a good point. And the discussion with the umbrella that I've had with John and Evan, we will have, because of the amount of money we've received, it subjects us to a single audit, right, Evan?
Correct.
So if our auditors don't sign off on this and said we inappropriately used the money, it's out the door and we do have to pay it for improper use. But it's really interesting. It'd be informational, I guess, to find out how these other departments have justified that, because other than Harrisville, and I think, John, that was part of the discussion that wasn't mentioned here, is the fire district has no guarantee that they'll receive money from any other city. I guess when you look at it, it's hard. I guess there would be fewer officers, but you can't divide a firefighter when needed, right? And say only 42% available to our city. So So I think part of the request is that if the decision was made to, this is an example, $1,500 to the police, we would pay $1,500 as a city to the fire district. But your point is well taken on the definition. I think it's an obligation we have as a city to make sure that we are in compliance with the CARES Act. John, I don't know in your discussion with other city managers or Evan with other finance folks, how they have interpreted and answered Councilman Swanson's
But
comment.
the first part of the quote that he read said, you're putting your police or fire or somebody in a harmful situation, not just enforcing, but a harmful situation, I think is how they're kind of.
Evan, go back and read that again. Ryan, is the way I interpret it is when they give the example of what they mean. They give the legalese that, that you're in the hazard pay if you're in contact with the general public, with COVID kind of thing. But in the example, they make a point, and I'm sure the attorneys, John, you know how attorneys are. I'm guessing that they made a point in that example to specifically indicate the circumstance in which that officer or firefighter was engaged in enforcing the public health law or a public health order, a public safety or a public health order. Not just general law enforcement, not just general firefighting. And again, I want to give our guys and gals every penny that is possibly available. But I also know that we have to be able to defend ourselves in that audit that's going to come. And I know that on the county side for the CARES Act, with cities in the county for the businesses, what Weber County did compared to Salt Lake County and Davis County and some of the other counties is wholly defensible. Davis County was basically, hey, how many businesses do we have? We're just going to kind of give everybody a lump sum without taking into account what was spent for COVID related expenses or anything like that, which we didn't feel was defensible in the event of an audit. And so I just want to make sure that when that audit comes, that we don't end up footing the bill for this thing out of taxpayers. Well, it's all taxpayer money, isn't it? Out of the city's tax coffers versus the federal tax dollars that we've been given.
So I can tell you that, and I've tried to use this analogy before, the CARES Act, think of it as a box with two ends. And you're trying to stay inside the box. And most cities on this particular question that I have seen have taken a much more liberal approach to what enforcing public health orders means. And when I say that, what I mean is they are in their policy, Ogden, for example, you can tell by the way it was written that the person who wrote it was going down the road of saying, okay, how many hours has a officer been doing this, or a fireman or an EMT been doing these particular activities, and let's track those hours and pay them for it. And then it got backstepped further and further to the point where it was basically those who are dedicated to the street, meaning patrol officers or that, we're giving them the hazard pay because it's so impossible to differentiate their hours. We can't do it. And I think the chief would testify that in our situation, our officers are called the Smiths sometimes for a shoplifter and sometimes because of a fight over a mask. And it's hard to differentiate that. And so I think in general, I would say we're probably pretty safe saying those members of the public safety departments whose job expectation is to interact with the public on a constant basis, I don't think we're going to get any flack for the single audit, despite that language that you're focusing on. But I do, in all honesty, worry about office staff and what I would call a secondary contact, meaning your exposure is to a sick employee that you work with, as opposed to the general public who you're called out to serve. And so that's where it's kind of this, but I can tell you, I have seen policies, not the worst policy I've seen was not in Weber County, and I will not name the city that it was because I do not think it's defensible, but they are taking some liberties with how they're giving the people the hazard pay to avoid income taxes, for example. Like there's just some things that are being done. And I think Evan and the chief's approach on this particular thing, I think we're safe. I don't think we will be found in default of the single audit, but it's because it's focused on the patrol officers who are expected to deal with the public day in and day out. So
Then I'm good. If you think
Well,
we're
there is-
safe, then I'm good.
There is I think as we all know, the government is changing the requirements on the CARES Act, if not every hour, every day, on how it's being interpreted. There's one thing that we could, and Evan and I believe, my memory serves us right, we had this discussion about having a conversation with the auditors. They're the ones that are basically going to give the reliance that the government puts their basis on. Have you had that discussion with the auditors regarding this plan to make sure that they would issue a positive opinion on the use of the money?
So when I talked to the auditors, it was before the idea of hazard pay really came up. And they provided this guidance that I've been referencing. So I have not specifically talked about hazard pay with them, but I'm happy to do that if that would be helpful.
What I would like to do, if we could, if this is kosher, is make a decision on what we're willing to do based upon, conditioned upon getting approval from our audit firm in regards to the issuance of the single audit, because I think I appreciate that John feels good about it, but I'm not sure he's going to write an opinion to the federal government that said, I felt good about this.
right.
And I'm with Councilman Swanson. I want to find a way to make this work, but I don't want to put the city at risk. So, John, could we do that? Could we make a decision based upon positive feedback from our auditors so that we can get this done? I believe it has to be planned or spent by the end of the year. And I appreciate Councilman Swanson bringing up that issue.
Yeah, we could have it set up so the council in whatever you're approving and discussing tonight identifies a dollar amount. And then I do think it would be helpful to have a discussion about if there's a job category that you feel qualifies or doesn't. And then the discussion on what level of contribution, if any, you would want to do with the fire district.
I would also like to make sure we address the Department of Labor issue on overtime.
Yeah.
I'll just express my opinion. I think we would be high risk for paying office personnel, those that aren't generally enforcing public safety out on the road instead of an occasional thing, i.e. we know the chief is not out on the road, although he could be called upon, Chief Quinney, and our lieutenants. But before we enter into that discussion on what we want to do based upon approval of the auditors, have we taken into consideration the Department of Labor's requirement for overtime when something of this nature is paid on an hourly basis? And who would compute that to make sure that we are in compliance with the CARES Act?
So Evan did take that into consideration. That's what this $38,000 is. That includes overtime hours for police officers, URS contributions, and IRS, Medicare, Medicaid.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I remember reading that now. That's what happens when you get old. Okay, so the question, let's address the first question is who would we feel is eligible?
Hey, Mayor, real quick.
Yes.
Just
Councilman
one, and John will probably have a better understanding. When I was with the chiefs going through the CARES Act, the word that kept coming up was your position had to be substantially differentiate. Is that right, John? But it never will. Yeah, it will never define what that means in the CARES Act. It says the onus is on the department to define what that means, because every department and every agency is so much different that you cannot put a definition on it. So that if that helps in our discussion tonight.
And that's true. The CARES Act, as many of you know, was written very hastily. And a lot of those things that would have been worked out, on the floor of the national legislature just never got worked out because there wasn't time.
Okay, so I have a question. We've gone through these calculations, right? And we've kind of put kind of a lump sum. Is that kind of where our decision stops? Because it sounds to me like we kind of say, okay, fire department, police department, we're going to give you $38,000. And then it's up to them and their payroll differentiation, hourly computation, however they figure out their payroll, how to distribute that. Is that kind of how this is going to work? I'm just wondering about the distribution of this money, because it's like, okay, well, we kind of get a general idea. How much are we going to distribute to them and say, this is how much you're going to get from North Ogden City. But then it sounds like it's up to the department for differentiated, tasks that deal with interacting with the public, that it's kind of on them, the department, to say where they're going to give it and to who and how much. We do the same thing. It's like a Pizza Man, we get all of these tips, just, other than for the drivers, we take them in and then we allocate them, right? It's like it goes into a big pool and then we just divide them up according to hours that people worked. And so, it kind of just, it sounds to me like that's kind of how it's going to go. Now, we got some, a PPP loan that is now going to be forgivable. I mean, they're changing the rules all the time, trying to make it as helpful as possible, right? And so I think with that in mind, that's really why they got the money. So I think when we're trying to distribute money to people that are on the front lines that are doing it, the intent is to make it so that, people that are out interfacing with, higher, risk with the general public, that they get the money that they need. So,
Councilwoman,
are we getting in too much detail other than we just need to decide how much of this lump we have to give to each department and then let them distribute them as they see fit?
First of all, John, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're responsible for the disbursement of the money since we received it.
Correct.
If we don't make sure that they're in compliance, then it's on our dime. And just, I was in some continuing professional education today, and actually the IRS is trying to make it very difficult for the benefit of the PPE loans. They are changing the rules and trying to make as much of that taxable, as they can. So you've got these two different government agencies, contradicting. But John, I believe it's up to us to make sure that the money we disperse is on the qualifying basis.
Yes, we would be the ones that would get the ding on our audit if we didn't comply with what the auditors and if ultimately, there will be spot federal audits, from an actual federal auditor that'll show up. I don't think we're likely to be that category, but at the same time, we don't want to be at risk if we are.
Hey, Mayor.
Yes, Councilman Barton.
One last thing that Chief Jones wanted me to mention. He did say that Northview is willing to sign an indemnification clause. These are big words. Even if North Ogden has to pay back the portion that Northview got, this department would pay the city back. But that's how strongly he feels about what he's asking. That his research, he thinks that we are good on our end.
Where would that money come from to indemnify the city?
Well, that's again above my pay grade. I'm just relaying information.
I mean,
it'd
I
be,
appreciate indemnifications, but I always look at the financial ability to live up to the indemnification. So I'm just wondering where that would come from, because your funds come from either the cities or from taxes. One thing I'd throw out just to move the consideration of the discussion along is I wouldn't be adverse to passing the same amount that we're going to give the police on to Northview, because I just don't know how you say, well, we'll take 42% of a person if there's a fire that, they are providing that service, and they have no guarantee, I guess, what the other cities are going to give. But
I know it's on the agenda tonight in Pleasant View.
so the two things is who we're going to pay and how much. Let's just move this thing along. Councilman Swanson, who do you feel ought to be eligible for this to be in compliance? What's your take?
Well, from what I've listened to, I think it should only be the frontline workers, the firefighters, the medics. I don't believe the secondary personnel ought to be in there, just so that because we don't want to run the risk of getting dinged on the audit. And we could have a big long discussion about that, but that's what I think. Okay. And I'm not averse to the 2111 that's in the example that Evan put up for us.
I think the 2111 is not in the example for the firefighters, is it, Evan? Or
it is.
It is.
So
okay.
I discounted that by
42%.
The 42%. If you don't do the 42% discount, then 65,441 is the total based on 31 employees.
It would be based on our percentage of the calls, that 42%.
Well, that's what I'm saying, I guess, Councilman Swanson, is I don't know how you have 42% of a firefighter. I mean, I think all firefighters would come if we had a major fire, but so I just wanted to clarify that here it's the 42% of 27,000.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm good with the 2111 per employee coming from North Ogden, so that we're fair across the board.
Councilwoman Stoker, do you have something you'd like to add?
Absolutely. First of all, I think if you're going to do it for one, you have to do it for the other, because in my opinion, they're equally important. The city can't function without the police or the fire. So it has to be across the board. And I'm okay also with the figures, the 2,100.
Are you in favor?
100, 1,100.
Excuse me. Are you in favor of excluding office staff?
I think so, because like Councilman Swanson said, they're not out in the right out in the public in the front lines, and I think we will get maybe kind of dinged on that one.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Severing, are you with us?
Yeah. I was just been thinking. I agree with the 2111, and I think because of our concern, they've given us a little bit of vagueness. Maybe that's good, and maybe that's bad interpretation. But we stick with just the primary individuals, both the firemen and the policemen.
Okay. Any other input from the council? I think we've got adequate direction, and that's conditional upon a positive response from the auditors. With that, do we have a motion? Would anyone like to put that in a motion? And that would be basically a resolution. No, I'm sorry, it would just be a motion to approve the hazard pay for public safety from the CARES Act funds with the parameters we put on. I'm sorry. So,
Mayor?
Yes.
No, Evan can go first.
Okay. So the 2111 is basically an average number, just to clarify that it would, the total budget would be translated into a dollar per hour amount. So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that the employees aren't expecting that there will be an even dollar amount per each one. It'll be translated into an hourly, but we need you to approve it in a lump sum average amount.
Now, what we're giving is an amount we're willing to spend on CARES Act in compliance with, the hourly rates. For instance, the hourly rate at the fire district would be different than at the police because of the number of hours worked. So
Okay,
thanks for clarifying that, Evan.
sure.
Okay, still looking for a motion.
So Mayor, I would move that we accept and approve the hazard pay for policemen and firemen, fire individuals, policewomen, as discussed in the parameters tonight from the CARES Act fund.
Would that be conditional upon positive response from the auditors, Councilman?
Yes, that would be based on the response from the auditors.
I'll second that.
And, okay, so just to clarify, that would be for qualifying employees. We're willing to pay up to $2,100 per employee based upon the qualifications of frontline. Would that make it right, Evan?
Yes, the 2111 included benefits.
Right.
Right.
Okay, any further discussion on that?
So are we setting a cap per employee that they can't go over 2111 even if
With
their
benefit.
hours? Do we have some variation in hours? Because we've kind of averaged it out.
Yes, that would be the available per employee. It'll be converted to the proper hourly rate, as Evan has mentioned. So it's a good point, Councilwoman Extra.
And it will include the hourly rate plus all the taxes and other things we have to pay.
Yep. So what we would need back from the fire department is the basis on which that was paid so that we can approve that to make sure it's in compliance. Evan, and so once again, we're setting the amount that we're willing to pay up to per employee, including benefits for those who qualify. That's $2,111 based upon an hourly rate. Does that sound right, Evan?
Yes, thank you.
Any further discussion, council? If not, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
And we have an abstention by Councilman Barker, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, council, for that discussion. And Evan, would you and John work with the chief and make sure that we're in compliance with the substance of what we discussed this evening? And as soon as you can get a discussion with the auditors that they're willing to sign off on this, that's the key to getting this done. So I would think before we go out with any information, further information, that we get that opinion.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, John, if you'd like to take item number 6 and what we're going to do with that 8-year-old Snickers bar that we have in evidence, why don't you take us away?
Okay. So council, you did this in January of this year. It's not something that you haven't done before. Basically what happens is everything that gets collected over in police evidence, as soon as we no longer need it for an active case, or we've held it for a certain length of time for things that have been turned in, lost bikes and wallets and rings and watches. And we come to you and we say, okay, we are converting some of this to public use. on this list, you'll see things, this item right here, for example, recovered stolen vehicle, straws, and a mountain bike. So there was a mountain bike that was never returned to anybody because we couldn't find who it was stolen from. So we would donate that to one of the local charity organizations, and then the straws would get thrown away probably. And so, but in order to do that, in order to create it, to take it from a found piece of property into a donated piece of property, the council has to approve it. As you can see from these two lists, or these 8 pages of items, the majority of the items are just going to be destroyed. They have no value. So the idea is they'll be destroyed. And in fact, there's some items obviously that have to be destroyed because they're drug paraphernalia and stuff. We just include it all in the same list, and we just need the council to approve the resolution. That what it does is it says, we will post these lists in public locations for the next 2 weeks to give the owners one last final chance to come and claim their property. And if they don't, then we will destroy or donate it as indicated on the list. Any questions for me?
What about the Snickers bar?
I think that was donated to the mayor's candy plate, but still 2 weeks have to go by. So if any of you are missing a Snickers bar, you can talk to Andra, who is our evidence clerk over there. And while we're on the topic, just so council's aware, Andra has elevated our evidence program in ways with the chief's support. It is night and day different because of her efforts and because of the support that her supervisors have given her over there. And we are just barely making through all of the evidence that has been out there for decades. So she's been really good about cleaning up that space.
Good, John. Would you pass on the council's appreciation for her great work?
Yes, we will. I believe the chief is listening tonight as well, so he can, but I will do it too. It always helps to share it twice.
All right. So with that, is there any further discussion before I seek a motion for resolution 15-2020, which would be to destroy, donate, or appropriate unclaimed property, personal property for public interest use? If not, be looking for a motion.
Mayor, I move that we adopt resolution 15-2020 for the disposition of evidence that is expired.
All right. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Council Member Stoker. Any further discussion? If not, I've been instructed we should probably do this by a roll call vote. So let's start with Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Severing.
Yes.
Councilman Barker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilmember Ekstrom.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. John, let's move on to item number 7. If you could give us a report on the moderate income housing.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. So council, this report is not something that the council necessarily weighs in on. It's more of an informational support or an informational report so you can see what's happening in the city. It is intense, it is detailed, it is boring, and even more boring because it was filled out by an attorney. But essentially what it does is it goes through and focuses on what were the strategies that the council adopted last December in our moderate income housing report, and what steps and what progress have we made and seen as we move forward. The standard state form is these first 4 pages that you see on the screen in front of you. And then there are additional pages that we've added that go through all of the bullet points and all of the strategies that the council adopted last year with their moderate income housing element of the general plan. And so if you have any questions about that, I can answer those questions. The real data or the real purpose of the report is found in these summary tables that goes through and talks about what is happening in North Ogden City and what we expect to see happening. The hard part about it is we're relying on data from 2017, which is 3 years old, to estimate where we're going to be in 5 years. And so we're dealing with 8 years of data. But what we'll see is as we do these annually, we'll start seeing the trend building. You know, in these first 3 or 4 years, we're not going to be able to see the type of data points that we're hoping to see because the strategies and the policies that we implemented last year won't be tracked in the census database for another 2 years. And so that's when we'll start when we get onto like the third or fourth iteration of this annual update, we'll start seeing how the policies that the council has adopted are starting to affect the affordability of housing in North Ogden. And so this report is, I don't want to say you shouldn't listen to it or you shouldn't be concerned about it because it is important, but it kind of is establishing our baseline for where we're at 2 years ago, so we know where we can be moving forward, you know. And this is the summary page that really is somewhat the most important. It is a table that the state generated. It's based only on rental housing, but rental housing and housing prices are usually closely related because investors will buy houses where they can make money to rent them. And people typically who are buying and purchasing houses are paying somewhat based on the rental market value of those houses. I know it's way more complicated than that, but you can see, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit. If you focus on this column, if you focus on this column, this is the one that really has the most to do with it, with what we're talking about. And every column that's in green is showing positive movement in North Ogden City from 2016 to 2018 as far as affordable units, meaning we had 440 units that were available we had 810 units available in that price bracket. 370 of them were filled by people who made the market range housing cost, and the other 440 were available to other individuals who either made more than 80% or who made more than 80%. So we actually had some underpriced housing. As you all know, in the past 2 years, housing has changed dramatically. And so I will not expect this same trend to continue as we get our report back next December and the following. But it is nice to know that we started out in the positive, and with a lot of the units coming on in the city, which may be considered more affordable, it will help stabilize and keep these numbers valid as we move forward. I know it's a lot of data. I'm sure that you read through it, and I just want to be here to answer any questions if you have them. So the council doesn't have to, we do approve this, but it's not by a resolution. It's just basically acknowledging that you saw it. And then we will send the paperwork into the state to verify, here's the report and here's all the paperwork they've asked for. And we just have to get it into them by December 1st.
Thank you, John, for that report. And, you know, John joins me on an affordable housing meeting that's involving other cities in the county. It's reported that the state of Utah is 40,000 dwelling units short of need. Affordable housing has kind of become a very interesting term because not much is very affordable today, frankly, with what's going on. But John, I just had one quick question, not to belabor this, but when it talks about the 2025 total population projection, seems like to me we've already exceeded 19,864 residents.
Yes, we have. and, and that's what I'm saying is the data that the summary chart, this summary chart is based on, is data that's showing the growth patterns between 2009 and 2017. And to put that into perspective, one of the things we talked about in a few council meetings ago, in 2017, we built, I think, 56 brand new homes. That was single family homes only. We also did some multifamily units, but and to put that in perspective, this year, so far, as of November 24th, 2020, we have already pulled more new home permits than we issued in the 2017 fiscal year. So our growth curve is much higher than this, but it's partially because of the number of multifamily units, and even they're not starter homes that we're seeing, but we do have some developments in the city that do focus more on that second tier home, which is someone has been in a starter home and they're moving into North Ogden at a second tier. It's not an $800,000 home, but it's a affordable home for them because their incomes have increased enough they can afford them.
I saw some of the townhomes down there in Providence Point, $319,000 now for, I think, 1,400 square feet. But this is, I guess, then a typical government report, John, that we base it on data, even though we know it's wrong.
The state requires us. In fact, this table and this table are both created by the state. We don't have a say in the data that goes into them. We just have to present it to the council and say, this is the projection. But I think what you'll see is this number that you just identified, Mayor, 19,864, that number will change in next year and the following year, because the 2018 and 19 numbers are going to be dramatic. And then the 2020 will be the best example we have, because they actually did a census, and they have an accurate count of the number of residents.
Okay. Any questions on the report, council?
Mayor, I have just one.
Okay, Councilman Swanson.
John, on the 6th page, 17th line, 8th word in, is that the word we wanted to use? I'm taking that as a yes.
Yes. I really felt very, very comfortable with that word choice.
Okay, just making sure.
Councilmember Ekstrom.
Okay, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around, is this a new thing that the state is doing because we have such a problem with housing? So this is really our baseline start. Where do we start? We got to start somewhere. This is the where we are. And then as we have to fill this report out, I guess sounds like annually from now on, it's going to get more accurate. Is that kind of what this is? Okay.
Yeah, so
there is an unfunded mandate eventually is where they're heading.
The initial, so 18 months ago, the law was passed that said we have to track it more detailed. And so the first year we had to create the moderate income housing element in the way the state wanted us to. And now this year we're just reporting on that element. And we will continue to report every year for the next foreseeable future till all of us retire.
Well, John, the basis of that reporting, though, is what is it, Senate Bill 34 that was passed? They're basically trying to say if you don't provide adequate affordable housing, whatever the definition of that is, we're going to start holding back some of your, is it Class B and C road funds, John?
It's not B and C, it's the TAP funds, the transportation area.
Right.
Yeah, but it is a source of funds. We do get a little bit from it. And compliance for us is not very difficult. The cities that have fixed rail systems have some bigger hurdles to jump through than we do.
All right, well, so noted that we've discussed the report. If there's no further questions or comments, thank you. All right, thanks, John, for that report. Let's move on to council reports. Let's hear first from Councilmember Stoker about her assignment with the police, if she has something to report to us.
I do. This time I didn't really confer with the chief because I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to go on a ride along with Sergeant Bersama, and it was first thing that I noticed when I got in his police car how good it smelled. he said he takes really good care of his car, and I could tell. And then the second thing was that I had the opportunity, he said I could go with him to clear a house. And I had no idea what clearing a house meant. So we went, and he said we would have to wait till, because they were about in the middle of shift change, and Childs was going to go off and two more, and another officer was going to come in. So we had to have the two officers come with us. And that was Officer Holmes and Farnsworth. And so we went down to that duplex that's on Washington. And of course, that Friday night, it was raining really, really hard. And so we got out and went to the back of the duplex, and the door was open, and the two officers went in first and gave the all clear, and then we went in. And I've never seen anything like that. As soon as we walked up the stairs and in the kitchen, the cupboards were off the walls. The linoleum was torn out. I mean, it was just utter destruction. There was a hole in the ceiling. Wires were pulled out. Pipes were gone. And you walked down the hall and you had to be really careful where you were walking because of everything. And for some bizarre reason, there was a bucket in the bathroom, and they find a place to get water so they can use the toilet and then pour the water down it. When everything else was a mess, that just astounded me to think that somebody cared enough to flush the toilet. You walk in the back bedroom, and there was a big hole in the ceiling, and the water was leaking through. And then you go down the basement, and that's where you really had to be careful because there was drug paraphernalia and different things that were down there. And we walked back out and got back in the car, and the sergeant, he grabbed the hand sanitizer and sanitized these hands. And I said, can I have some of that too? And I told him, I said, I felt like I really had to put my shoes outside, leave my shoes outside because I felt so contaminated. It was awful. And I thought, these are things our officers have to go into and see. And of course, the bedroom that's was leaking upstairs is now coming down into the basement. So that is very much a hazard to anybody who goes in there, whether it's kids, homeless, our officers. I mean, it just really is not a safety issue. Then I went back to the police station and with them, and of course we walked in and it's dark, and we're going through to check out some things. And I said to him, does this place ever creep you out? I said, because it's creeping me out because it's dark and there's so many hallways and nooks and crannies. And I thought, how do you ever feel safe in here? How does, because who knows how they would get in or hide. And you can see where they write the reports that you can see in. And we went into the break room, and they had they had donuts on the table. And of course, I am no donut expert, but my standards, they were disgusting. And one of their comments was that some of these officers, when they have they go in at 2 or get off at 4, and they're through with whatever they're called out to do. There's no place open to get anything decent to eat, only your 7-Elevens or Mavericks where they go in and get a candy bar or a pop. And they also said that those chairs that they sit on they're so uncomfortable. They're just lifetime chairs. And with all their equipment that they wear, their belts and everything, they just slide off the chairs because they don't fit. And it's just very uncomfortable. And if anybody's ever wondered why, you'll see the 2 police cars parked one way and the other way, is that they're writing the reports. They have nowhere to go to write the reports. if they go into the police station, they just have this narrow desk with their 10-inch cubby hole to sit there and write a report on. So they're outside in their cars writing their reports. And another thing I've noticed too is that if you ever wonder what they're doing all night, they're driving through the neighborhoods and seeing what's going on and how, just seeing what making sure everything's safe, and they use their spotlights on certain areas to make sure there's nobody back there or anything going on. And as we were driving through one neighborhood, one of the residents was outside, and they waved at the office at us as we went by. So they're glad to see that they're out in their neighborhoods, and I think that gives them a sense of security. So I mean, if I just have no words or can stress enough how much a new police station is needed. I mean, they go home and their wives say, "You're not putting these clothes in my washer." They won't, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't want those clothes to come in my washer either after some of the places and the things that they've had to do. So once again, I mean, I'm just amazed at what they put up with and the good job that they do, and how sometimes they're able to keep their morale up and the long hours they work, and we really need another officer or two, because they're so understaffed that they don't have time. They can't take time off like some do, because there's nobody to fill their shift. And so they feel guilty if they take off and leave who's on that night by themselves, or somebody else has to fill in. So I can't stress enough how much things are needed for them and the great job that they do. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks for that report, Councilmember Stoker. I think it's evident that we've got an issue in our city that we need to work towards resolving. And John and myself did meet with Councilmember Stoker, and John is following up on the vacated property down there to get that resolved. It's surely an eyesore in our city. So appreciate that report, Councilmember Stoker. Councilmember Severing, do you have anything you need to discuss with us this evening?
Yeah, in lieu of time, I'll just mention that Dave has kept me informed of the different projects they've been working on. And there's been 22 projects that the Public Works men and women have been working on. And as of today, as of this week, 11 of the 22 are completely completed. And he also wanted me to mention first, thanks to all of the citizens for being patient as they had the leaf truck out and operating, and appreciated the public's patience. And then also wanted me to mention that this year they have remedied a couple of the snowplow routes. So they're trying to get, they'll be able to actually have a route that allow them to get between 2,600 and 2,300 north completed faster. So we'd ask the citizens to keep an eye on that and make sure that that is working for them, those individuals who live between 2,600 and 2,300 north. So that's all that I think was a necessity.
Thank you, Councilman. And once again, that request, I just want to acknowledge the response by Public Works on that 2,600 to 2,300. That was based upon some requests by citizens to try to improve that. So I think it's evident of their desire to try to make sure we're taking good care of our citizens. Just one thing I would add too in our discussion with Dave, I think it was in staff meeting this morning, he's also having a company come up and give us an estimate of what it would cost to chip all the stuff up in the green waste pit instead of burning it, so that we can make it a proper decision on what to do there. So appreciate Dave and his team's efforts. So thank you. Councilmember Ekstrom, do you have anything you need help with or you'd like to report this evening?
Just a little bit. I just touched base with Tiffany a little bit about what's happening with Parks and Recreation with regard mostly to the COVID restrictions that are coming up. As of today, girls basketball is back on with symptom and temperature checking before every game and practice, and boys basketball will probably have the same protocol. Their seasons are shorter and smaller, and they're trying to spread out, and they have limited gym space, but they're working with other cities to kind of try and remedy that. They have curtailed like any kind of display or event that would constitute any kind of gathering per our instructions. They do have the lights on, of course. There is a Santa letter drop that's over at the Bicentennial Park. So if you put in a self-addressed stamped envelope, you will receive a reply if it's mailed by December 18th. So that is my report.
Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus.
There we go.
Thank you. All right, appreciate those reports. Let's move on to item number 9. Public comments. If you have a comment to make, please state your name, your address, and please try to limit your comments to 5 minutes. John, do we have anyone from the public that would like to comment this evening? Either via chat or in voice.
Not yet. I did miss a comment from JD as he signed off after his presentation, just said, thanks again, have a great night. But no other attendees have raised their hands at this point.
All right. We will move on then to comments from the mayor, council, and staff. If council doesn't mind, I'd like to start this evening with the letter I received that was addressed to me. Some of you may have seen it. This is from our city recorder, Annette Spendlove. I'll just read it verbatim. Dear Mayor, Council, and John, it's with a heavy heart that I submit my resignation. My years with North Ogden City have been wonderful as I have served for 6 mayors, 22 city council members, and 6 city administrators / city managers. I have met so many wonderful people in our community and outside of our community. Many employees have passed through my door, either coming or leaving, and I'm grateful for their friendship, and it's time for me to retire. I am looking forward to traveling, completing many projects, and most importantly, spending time with my family, including my 22 grandchildren. My last day in the office will be December 30th, 2020. I'd be happy to meet with you at your convenience to discuss my resignation, transition of my duties, and help with the transition of a new successor. I wish North Ogden and all of its employees, elected officials, and citizens much success in the coming years as they all work together to keep North Ogden City a viable, friendly, and welcoming community. Sincerely, Annette Spendlove, City Recorder. So I wanted to read that letter, and I believe Annette's with us. I would ask if Annette would like to make some comments. 19 years as our city recorder is nothing to minimize. And Annette has been an icon in the city for many, many years. So Annette, would you like to make some comments?
I didn't think it would be this hard. I actually was pretty excited to finally go home. But I want to thank everyone that I've worked with over the years, many mayors, many councils, and this present council. This has been a big part of my life. Never ever thought I would do something like this. I always thought I'd be home raising my children, but they all moved away too fast. Anyway, thank you for everything.
It is tough when you've made so many friends and things in the city to move on to that next horizon. So, council, any comments from you now, since we're on the council, mayor, and staff comments?
Mayor.
Yes, Councilwoman Swanson.
Just a A huge thank you to Annette for the many years of service, for all that she personally taught me in the last nearly 7 years of being on the council, and the times that she's put me straight and made sure that I was doing things the way that they ought to be done. Her dedication to the city is an example for anyone who claims to be dedicated to an organization. We will miss you, Annette, and we're grateful for all that you've given the city. Thank you.
Councilmember. Oh, I'm sorry. Councilwoman Stoker.
I too would like to just say thank you, Annette. You've been a huge help to me these last few years, and putting up with my craziness or anxiety when I don't know how to do something or find something. You've been the best at that, and just appreciate all that you've done for a lot of people. So thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Ekstrom, I saw you had a comment.
I do. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Annette. You have been nothing but wonderful to work with for me. You've always been encouraging and helpful, always finding answers to my questions, which I always have a zillion of, you know. And I just love you with all my heart and wish you well in your next endeavors, especially spending time with those grandkids. I'm looking forward to that stage of life. I think that's the way to go. Thank you so much.
Councilwoman Ekstrom, you knew I'm trying to develop an app, and that app is how to get grandkids by skipping raising the children. I figure people would pay big dollars for that.
I would pay big bucks for that. Yes,
any other comments from council members this evening?
Mayor, I did also want to just tell Annette, thanks for being so patient with me as I learned and am still continuing to learn about how to be an effective council person. And I've known Annette for many years, and she's an outstanding woman. So thank you for your commitment to North Ogden City over the last 19 years, and hope things are going well with Cameron, and good luck in future adventures.
All right. I've known Annette for years. I've known her as Annette Martinez from Ben Lomond High School. And I've watched her for a number of years, even though there was quite a gap between high school when we saw each other again, which was at the University of Utah Transplant Center, where Cameron was getting a transplant and my middle son was getting a transplant. And I know Annette has been through a very emotional time lately with the transplant of Cameron, and we're glad he's doing well. And these are emotional times, and Annette has done many things for the city that go unrecognized. And so it's always tough to lose a 19 tenured team member from the city, but she's made the commitment to make sure that things continue on, and will give us input on how we proceed from here. So Annette, we wish you well in your new endeavor in life, and I'm a little bit jealous that you have 22 grandkids, but may they enjoy your grandma touch, and I hope all goes well. Okay, any other comments from council tonight or staff before we move
Mayor.
on? Councilmember Barker.
Since you skipped me, I'd like to just give my appreciation to Annette as well.
Wait a minute. What's the skip stuff? Did you were off screen and I didn't see you raise your hand, so.
I was waiting my turn.
What's the skip stuff? What?
Well, I just want to give my appreciation to Annette. She really does help all of us, councilmen, members, women, whenever we get started, and make sure we stay in line. And she's got big shoes to fill over there.
I'm just wondering if she recognized keeping me in line was too difficult or something. You know.
Thank you all.
All right. Any other comments from anything else regarding this night's meeting or staff? Any comments from staff? I know we have some with us.
We have the chief, Lieutenant Hines and Lauren Gardner. I did just want to mention, council, I will send you out an email. We are planning on, because of COVID, obviously, we canceled our Christmas and holiday events, including the holiday dinner with the employees. We are still doing a socially distanced lunch. And we would like it if the individual council members in charge of those departments could attend. So I'm going to reach out to you to see your availability the week of the 14th for that, so that we can, join together and have some food in a safe, pre-packaged fashion. So anyway.
Does that mean I get to go to every one?
Yes, Mayor.
I better get on the diet quick in preparation for that.
Adding to our garbage problem. Repackaged everything.
Yes. Anything else, John?
No.
I think we did instigate a fine of $100 for any council member says that they're going to come, for which we buy their lunch and they don't show. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, that's correct.
Yes, I think there's a $100 fee for those who don't show after committing. All right. Okay, with that then, we'll move on to item number 11. And I would look for action to consider entering into a closed meeting in regards to discussion of character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, which are qualifications for a closed meeting. I'd be looking for a motion to recess the agenda that we're in and enter into a closed meeting to discuss those things that I mentioned. Do we have a motion?
Mayor, I would move that we recess from our open meeting and open up a closed meeting at this point.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second from Councilwoman Swanson. Any further discussion?
John, will you send the link to my personal email, please?
Yes, at lomanpeak@gmail, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I will send it right now, and you'll go into a waiting room, council, and I'll have to let you in.
Okay, so we're recessing our meeting at 9:09 p.m. So John, if you'd send out that link, we'll proceed along. If you'd send it also to my business email.
Yes.
Okay, with that, we'll recess our meeting and reconvene upon completion of our closed meeting.